Today we're going to be looking at 12 mustache wide receivers for Dynasty Fantasy Football. Really, we're taking a look at the market. We're looking at cheaper wide receivers that you can hoard on the back end of your roster to see what happens throughout the offseason, throughout next year. Whatever you want to do, it's whatever you want to do with your Dynasty team. I'm just here to help you find some options to make some moves. But before we dig in, you need to click that subscribe button right now. We're looking at these players every day. We're looking at player values every day. We're looking at rookie drafts, the player values from the rookie draft, rookie mock drafts, and everything else. Click that button. Stop missing out. We're looking at our first player that we're stashing, or a lot of you guys are going to be stashing this offseason, Jalen Coker, and the Cokeheads unite. And he had some good PFF grades, good separation scores, one of the highest in grades among rookie wide receivers, and he had some good moments this year, had some down moments, had some injuries baked in there. His value shot up like a rocket from the 200-some range up to wide receiver 58 throughout the season. We're leveling off, and we're about to infuse a rookie class here. However, it's not a deep wide receiver class this year, so a guy like Jalen Coker might go unscathed. And we're looking at the first round of the NFL draft. It's unlikely that they're going to select a wide receiver there, the Carolina Panthers, and they drafted a wide receiver in the first round last year. And as we get deeper in the draft, the talent pool is going to dissipate a bit. They could still draft a wide receiver, but things are looking good for Jalen Coker. We're looking at free agency, and we might see a wide receiver that went undrafted last year go unscathed going into the 2025 season, if not see some competition, as I believe they need to bring somebody in to help this team out, to help bring in some competition. But the free agency class isn't really that deep, and it's probably going to get less deep as some of these guys get re-signed to their teams or go to other places. Jalen Coker's got some talent. He showed that on the field. He was lightning in the bottle in training camp, and he was solid. He got you one wide receiver 1 week and a wide receiver 2 week, and in 2 games outside of those parameters in double-digit scoring. One was in week 18, but still, thousands of people play fantasy in week 18, and week 17 wasn't much different than week 18 this year. That being said, we're not focusing on that. Jalen Coker is a good stash for the end of your bench to see what happens throughout the offseason. Buy, sell, hold wise. Wide receiver 58, we're very cheap right now. Even if they bring in a guy, his stock can't get much lower than wide receiver 58. The market's too scared to make a stance on him. The market's too scared to really go one way or the other. And they're saying, hey, we're going to keep him cheap until we figure out what's going on this offseason. So it's not like he's really a sell. The time to sell was right after week 8, right after week 15 if you're going to do that. Right now, you're just waiting to see what's going to happen in the offseason. Now we're looking at Jordan Whittington, another wide receiver that shot up like a rocket. In 2025, he got some run early in the season. Injuries are baked in. They've been baked in throughout his collegiate career. That's something to think of with Jordan Whittington. Another thing to think about is once Sean McVay likes a player, especially a young prospect, they are going to get their opportunity. They're going to get their run. We saw that with Kyron Williams. He does not leave the field. They like Jordan Whittington. We had that heavily noted throughout training camp with this team. He got opportunity early, and it was due to a lot of injuries. It's hard to get opportunity with this team due to Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. However, Jordan Whittington is a wide receiver to stash for a bit here. We're valued at wide receiver 87. So when you're looking at the wide receivers in that range, not him versus like a Devonta Smith or anything like that, you're looking at him in that range of value. He's free, and on top of that, there's not many upside plays to look at. We're going into year 2 in an offense that adores him. That being said, this is a wide receiver that could experience some growth potential in 2025. We can't stamp it. We can't concrete it out. But it looks like there's potential for that happening, especially if we get another good training camp out of Jordan Whittington. And the free agency class isn't that strong. The wide receiver class for the NFL draft isn't that strong. So a guy like Jordan Whittington might see some more competition added to this team, but might be in a good place with another strong training camp. Roman Wilson, when it comes to his value, it tanked. Wide receiver 80. It should bounce back up here soon to a respectable position, but not too high. It was at wide receiver 55 starting the year, and now we got bad sentiment with George Pickens, especially with the market. We talked about George Pickens, I think 2 weeks ago, and his value decreased a good bit, and really how the season ended. And there's a high probability or good probability or a chance that he could get traded or moved in the offseason. We're watching that. Roman Wilson has okay draft capital, but he's got good speed, very nuanced route runner, was hurt all year, so we didn't really get to see him on the field, which means he did not get an opportunity to fail. So this is a wide receiver that's out to prove himself his second season, that could see a significant rise in value. Right now we're wide receiver 80. He's free, might not be very liquid because he's not proven to be a failure yet. He's proven that he can't be on the field due to injury. So you may not be able to catch him at that price point. You might be able to catch him at a little bit more if you sweeten the deal a little bit. Like, I don't see him giving away. But he's also a guy that if you're doing a much larger trade with other players and you're trying to get something else added to it, he's a guy that could be liquid in that standpoint with that context. Roman Wilson could be a bounce back player when it comes to fantasy value. But on top of that, it's hard for the Steelers to produce multiple fantasy relevant wide receivers, so that kind of makes things a little bit leery until they get things settled at the quarterback position and in the passing offense. But as a prospect, we got speed, we got nuance in the route running. Troy Franklin, we're on the Denver Broncos. Bo Nix loves him. He's targeted on about 22% of the routes that he ran. He did have some drops this year. He did have some moments where he wasn't really on the field that much. But at wide receiver 69, the market is cold on him right now. Maybe you can say lukewarm to cold because there are some people that liked him as a prospect. But when you look at a guy like Troy Franklin, if he gets the opportunity to run more routes, to increase that route participation rate, to get more targets, because there are moments where he's getting 5 to 6 targets in a game, showing some opportunity. Fantasy-wise, that didn't hit. But in an offense that's developing, and you're looking at a 4th-round pick where the Broncos had to trade up to get him, and they woke up that morning saying, hey, we have to make this happen or we're not going to feel good. They valued him higher than what they paid for him. They could still bring in other assets at wide receiver, even tight end through the draft. Tight end's more likely early on in the 1st round, as we've done a million mock drafts so far. But it's not a deep wide receiver class. And you can argue Troy Franklin would be very competitive in this year's draft. Not saying he'd be a top prospect, but he'd be very competitive among this wide receiver group in the 2025 draft class. This is a wide receiver to pay attention to. At wide receiver 70 range, it's not like you're betting too much on him, the house or anything, but most of you guys are holding on to him to see what happens. Kayshon Boutte, wide receiver 75. And the Patriots do have to bring something in at wide receiver, and they're in a position to get T-Mac in the 1st round. This could nuke his value, but you can't really say it's going to nuke it until he leaves the team, because you do throw out more than one wide receiver at a time, and sometimes it takes a rookie wide receiver some time to develop. But what we know about Kayshon Boutte in this offense is that he's further removed from the injuries, and we are running almost all the routes, pushing a 90% route participation rate every week, 6 targets. Steady Eddie. From week 8 onward, we averaged around 6 targets per game. On to season 4.4, but we started off slow. The back end of the season, 6 targets in 6 games, 2 games with 5, 1 game with 7. We were solid there. We only had 1 game where we hit in fantasy. That was week 16. The production wasn't there for that. Wide receiver 75. So if you're looking for a guy on the back end of your roster that is going to show any promise whatsoever, he's already showed that. That's hard to reel off that many targets per game. Not be productive, but be good on air yards, be good on route participation, be the team's wide receiver 1. It wasn't in production, but it was in targets and routes. Kayshon Boutte is a guy to watch. He might get nuked by T-Mac in the 1st round, but it may not nuke him entirely, because if you're running that many routes, if you're leading your team in routes ran, you are valued in that offense. Pay attention to him. Malik Washington. Looked good in the back end of the season when we got more opportunity due to injuries. He's a wide receiver to watch. He blew up in the All-Star Game circuit right before the NFL draft, right before the Combine. Good size and just athleticism. He's got some clicks to his game, good hands. He's a guy you can throw out in the slot. You can move him around a good bit. And he's a guy who's rapidly developing. Late round pick. The Dolphins got him at a steal. And he's a guy that could develop into this offense and be much more here in the near future. A good money ball play as well. Like, he may not be a guy that turns into a wide receiver 1 or even a top tier wide receiver 2. But he could be a guy that you could use when you need a wide receiver right off the bench. And has that possibility, if he's running enough routes, to get you a little something, maybe get you a 10 spot here and there. You're catching him at wide receiver 85, at his lowest in the last 6 months. He was at wide receiver 105. He's holding value pretty strong to the point where if I don't mention him in this video, somebody in the comments will be asking about him. That's letting you know that people are looking to stash him, looking to hoard him going into the 2025 season. A.D. Mitchell has a lot of upside for a wide receiver 55 prospect. Round 2 draft pick, 4.3 speed, and an offense that will push it downfield vertically. Just the passing numbers isn't there, especially when it comes to pass attempts. And there's a lot of mouths to feed in Indianapolis. You got Michael Pittman, you got Josh Downs, you got Alec Pierce. You got a lot of mouths to feed here. And this was a season where he's very quiet. However, he was creating a lot of separation off the break. He was looking nuanced. He was looking good per the metrics. A.D. Mitchell could be a sneaky guy, especially when we get more volume in the passing game, start getting more accurate downfield with their targets, and start running more routes. However, there's a lot of competition in this offense to really push multiple fantasy-relevant wide receivers. Rashid Shaheed, coming back from the knee injury, but this is a wide receiver you shouldn't forget about. They should bring in more competition in the passing game. But when you look at Rashid Shaheed, you're looking at a guy that gets all the air yards. He gets pushed downfield. He gets those deep targets. And he's a splash play wide receiver. If they bring in more competition this year, especially through the draft, then you might see a reduction in targets per game. However, air yards per game might go back to 2022. But as a wide receiver 51 to 60 range, wherever he's being valued in your league, that's a good price tag considering that you're still going to get boom weeks. He's a guy that you throw in off the bench and you just pray that he brings in that deep ball. When you're setting lineups, you got to think about that context. I'm not thinking about picking him up being the next wide receiver 1, being the next wide receiver 2. I'm picking up knowing that over a course of a season, I might look silly, but there's going to be a few weeks where he's going to boom in production. Just reeling in a deep ball here and there because of the vertical passing attack. They like to get downfield, and they like to take Shaheed downfield. You're looking at his air yard numbers in 2022. I'm just speculating a reduction if they bring somebody in. Multiple games over 100 yards, multiple games over 80 yards. And we could see that potential, and that could be like your wide receiver 5 that you use in a pinch when you're hurting setting your lineups. Cedric Tillman. So when we got our opportunity with the Browns, we did well. Injuries hit, and that impacted us. Quarterback plays a big issue. It's the Browns. The passing volume's a little bit slower. However, when we're getting vertical, Cedric Tillman can get you a little something. His value jumped up again from wide receiver 31 to wide receiver 54. Market sentiment's not going to be too high, and he's going to be very liquid in the offseason due to the back end of the season not being super productive, due to him not being out there. When you look at Cedric Tillman, you're looking at a guy here that could be another sneaky option, especially if they can patch up the quarterback position and keep it moving. Now we're looking at Marvin Mims. Had a strong end to the season, jumped up in value big time. 3 wide receiver 1 week, especially if you count week 18. We started getting more targets in the back end of the season, but this is a guy that gets the deep ball. He's going to be a splash play option, wide receiver 50 range, paired with Bo Nix. They're trying to really revamp this passing offense. They're exploring it. They're trying to see what we can do with these wide receivers. We got Cortland Sutton. We got Troy Franklin. We got Vele. We got Marvin Mims. We got some options here. And Bo Nix isn't afraid to spread around the football, spread around the love. Marvin Mims could be a good stash play. Had a good collegiate profile coming out from Oklahoma. Very productive, good speed, and could be used in a pinch if you're looking for that home run threat, and it could develop into much more going into year 3. Malachi Corley, we're going into year 2. We were barely used throughout his rookie season. Huge red flag. But to me, that's a red flag if I'm paying up for him. It's obviously a cheap speculation if I'm paying wide receiver 88 or less when I look at the value. And it looks like the market's tanked on him, but it looks like they're looking back at him saying, hey, maybe we get a little bit more in year 2 for Malachi Corley. A stash play to see what happens. And if it doesn't happen, it's a stash play that you got very cheap and you can move on from it, so there's no sunk cost there. Ray McCloud at around wide receiver 100. It looks like there's a good chance we'll be back with the Falcons, and we were getting targets, we were getting workload, and we're getting good baseline production here. So this could be like your wide receiver 6 or something like that on your team that you can catch pretty cheap in trade, and you're getting some good value out of him because you're getting targets. So in a pinch, you can throw him in. He's a guy that was barely used in redraft. He's a guy that was barely used when setting lineups. But again, if you're looking at a speculation play at this part of the rankings and values around wide receiver 100, this is a good get. This is a good value here. Michael Penix hasn't proven it yet, but it looks like he can move the football, spread it around a bit. McCloud runs a lot of routes. He gets a lot of targets in his offense, considering we got a lot of competition. So he's a guy not to be afraid of, and he's a guy that can really ramp up the back end of your bench. Those are 12 wide receivers we're looking at stashing this week. We'll have more stashes next week. Make sure to hit that subscribe button right now and stop missing out. I want to thank you for watching, and I'll catch you on the next video.